The auctioneer's gavel cracked through the humid Kansas air like a gunshot, and Victoria Thornton felt her stomach drop as the crowd of men pressing close to the makeshift platform began shouting numbers that reduced her to nothing more than livestock. She stood there in the blazing August sun of 1879, her cotton dress clinging to her back, hands trembling at her sides as she tried to maintain the last shreds of her dignity. The platform had been erected right in the middle of Salena's Main Street, directly across from her uncle's general store where she had worked faithfully for 3 years, since arriving from St. Louis after her parents died of typhoid. Uncle Herbert stood at the edge of the crowd, his watery eyes refusing to meet hers, his gambling debts apparently more important than the girl he had promised her dying mother he would protect. "Do I hear $500? The auctioneer bellowed, a portly man named Clarence who usually sold horses and farm equipment. The fact that he showed no hesitation in selling a human being told Victoria everything she needed to know about the kind of town Salena had become. 500 for this fine young woman, trained in shopkeeping, cooking, and all manner of domestic skills. Victoria's cheeks burned with humiliation. She was 22 years old, educated and capable, yet here she stood being sold to pay off debts she had not incurred. The practice was illegal, technically, but in towns like this where the law was whatever the richest men decided it would be, such technicalities meant nothing. Her uncle had explained it to her just that morning with tears running down his face, telling her that Marcus Dalton, the territory's most ruthless cattle baron, had called in his markers and demanded payment immediately. When Herbert could not produce the $3,000 he owed, Dalton had suggested this alternative arrangement that would satisfy the debt and provide the winning bidder with either a wife or an indentured servant, depending on their preference. 600. Shouted a rancher Victoria recognized from the store, a man with tobacco-stained teeth who had made her skin crawl every time he looked at her. 700, came another voice, this one belonging to the owner of the saloon, a place Victoria had never entered but had heard terrible stories about. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to keep her knees from buckling. The crowd had swollen to nearly 100 people, some genuinely interested in bidding, others simply there for the spectacle. She caught sight of several women she knew from church, their faces showing pity but not one of them speaking up against this travesty. In that moment, Victoria understood that she was utterly alone in the world. The bidding continued, climbing past $800, then 900. With each increase, Victoria felt her future narrowing to a dark point. She had tried everything she could think of to avoid this moment. She had approached the sheriff, who had shrugged and said it was a civil matter. She had begged her uncle to flee with her to another town, but he was too frightened of what Dalton's men would do if they ran. She had even considered running away alone, but she had no money, no horse, and nowhere to go in a territory where a woman traveling alone faced dangers she did not want to imagine. $1,000. The saloon owner's voice carried a note of triumph that made Victoria's blood run cold. The auctioneer raised his gavel. $1,000. Do I hear 1,100? Going once for $1,000 to Mr. Peterson. Victoria closed her eyes, praying for a miracle she knew would not come. $5,000. The voice cut through the crowd like a blade, deep and clear, and brooking no argument. Every head turned to see who had spoken. Victoria's eyes snapped open, and she found herself staring at a man sitting astride a magnificent paint horse at the edge of the crowd. He was tall even sitting down, with broad shoulders and a lean frame that spoke of hard work and harder living. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his face, but she could see the strong line of his jaw, and the set of his mouth that indicated he was not a man accustomed to being contradicted. The crowd parted as he guided his horse forward. "I said $5,000, he repeated, his voice carrying easily across the sudden silence. "And I am paying in gold." The auctioneer's eyes widened. "Sir, that is far more than necessary. The current bid stands at only 1,000. "I heard the current bid." The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the dusty street with a solid thump. As he moved closer to the platform, Victoria could see him more clearly. He was perhaps 28 or 29, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes so intensely blue they seemed to reflect the Kansas sky. His clothes were worn but well maintained, the gear of a working cowboy rather than a wealthy rancher. A revolver rode low on his hip, and something about the way he carried himself suggested he knew how to use it. $5,000. Do you accept my bid or not?" Clarence the auctioneer looked uncertainly toward the back of the crowd where Marcus Dalton sat in his carriage, watching the proceedings with the cold interest of a snake observing mice. Dalton was a heavy man in his 50s, dressed in an expensive suit that looked absurd in the summer heat. He had made his fortune in cattle and consolidated his power through methods that skirted the edge of the law when they did not outright cross it. His expression remained neutral as he gave a small nod to the auctioneer. "Sold." Clarence brought the gavel down with a crack that seemed to seal Victoria's fate. "Sold to the gentleman for $5,000. The stranger did not waste time. He pulled a leather pouch from inside his vest and tossed it to the auctioneer, who caught it with fumbling hands. The clink of coins was unmistakable. As Clarence opened the pouch and his eyes went wide at the gleam of gold inside, the stranger turned and walked directly to the platform. He held out his hand to Victoria. "My name is Matthew Travis," he said quietly, his voice meant only for her ears. "And I think we should leave this place immediately." Victoria stared at his outstretched hand, her mind reeling. This man had just spent an enormous sum of money on her, more than 5 times what anyone else had offered. What did he want? What did he expect? But as she looked into his eyes, she saw something there that gave her pause. Not the predatory gleam she had seen in the other bidders, but something else. Something that looked almost like anger on her behalf. She took his hand. His palm was calloused, but his grip was gentle as he helped her down from the platform. The crowd pressed close, everyone wanting to see what would happen next, but Matthew Travis paid them no attention. He led Victoria directly to his horse, then paused. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Yes," Victoria said, finding her voice for the first time since the auction began. "My father taught me when I was young." "Good." He swung up into the saddle, then reached down and pulled her up behind him with surprising ease. "Hold on tight, we are leaving now." "Wait." The shout came from Marcus Dalton, who had climbed down from his carriage and was pushing through the crowd. "The debt is not fully paid. Herbert Thornton owed $3,000. The girl only brought in $1,000 before your bid. There are still $2,000 outstanding." Matthew Travis did not even turn to look at him. "Check with your auctioneer. I paid $5,000. If Herbert Thornton owed you $3,000, then he is paid in full with $2,000 to spare. The man can consider it recompense for the years his niece worked in his store. Now, if you will excuse me." He touched his heels to the horse's flanks and they moved forward. The crowd scattered before them. Victoria wrapped her arms around Matthew's waist, holding on as the horse broke into a trot and then a canter. Behind them, she could hear shouting, but Matthew ignored it all. They rode through Salena's main street and out onto the open prairie, the town falling away behind them like a bad dream. They rode for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one, following a path that led northwest across rolling grassland dotted with wildflowers. The sun beat down mercilessly, but the speed of their passage created a breeze that made it bearable. Victoria's mind raced with questions, but she remained silent, too overwhelmed by the sudden change in her circumstances to know what to say. This man, this Matthew Travis, had just spent a fortune to buy her freedom or her servitude. She still was not certain which, and now they were riding toward an unknown destination for unknown purposes. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Matthew slowed the horse to a walk and then brought them to a stop near a small creek lined with cottonwood trees. He dismounted first, then reached up to help Victoria down. Her legs were shaky from the long ride and she stumbled slightly. He steadied her with a hand on her elbow until she regained her balance. "I apologize for the rough journey," he said, "but I wanted to put distance between us and that town as quickly as possible." Victoria looked up at him, really seeing him for the first time without the pressure of the crowd and the auction. He was handsome in a rugged way, with fine lines around his eyes that suggested he spent most of his time outdoors. There was a kindness in his face that seemed at odds with the hard set of his jaw. He looked tired, she realized, and there was something in his eyes that spoke of old sorrows. "Why did you do it?" The question burst out of her before she could stop it. "Why did you spend so much money on a stranger?" Matthew removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair. "Because what was happening back there was wrong," he said simply, "and because I had the means to stop it." "But $5,000, Victoria pressed. "That is a fortune. You could buy a ranch with that money or cattle or any number of things that would benefit you. Instead, you bought a person. You bought me, and I need to know what you expect in return." He met her eyes directly. "I expect nothing in return," he said. "You do not owe me anything, Victoria Thornton. What happened today was not a purchase. It was a rescue disguised as a purchase because that was the only language those men would understand." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You know my name. I have been in your uncle's store several times over the past few months. You waited on me twice. You probably do not remember I bought rope and nails both times, nothing memorable, but I remembered you. You were always kind, always patient, even with difficult customers. And when I rode into town this morning and saw what was happening, saw you standing on that platform looking like your world was ending, I could not just ride away." "So what happens now?" Victoria asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "You say I do not owe you anything, but that is not how the law sees it. By the laws of this territory, I belong to you now. I am your property until I work off my debt or you release me from it." Matthew's expression hardened. "The law is wrong. You are not property. You are a human being with the same rights as any man, regardless of what some piece of paper says. Which brings me to what I want to say to you." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I have a small ranch about 20 miles north of here, near the Solomon River. It is not much, just a cabin and enough land to run a small herd of cattle. I work it alone right now, though I am hoping to hire on some help for the fall roundup. You can come there with me if you want. I will give you your own room and your own space. You can help around the ranch if you choose to, but only if you want to. Or, if you prefer, I can give you a horse and enough money to get to Abilene or Dodge City or anywhere else you want to go. You choose your future, Victoria. Not me, not your uncle, not the law. You." Victoria stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. In her experience, men did not simply hand women choices. They took what they wanted and called it their right. Yet here was Matthew Travis, a man who had just spent $5,000 on her, telling her she could leave if she wanted to. "I do not understand," she said slowly. If you give me money and a horse and I leave, you lose everything. Why would you do that?" "Because it is the right thing to do," Matthew said. He settled his hat back on his head and looked out across the prairie. 5 years ago, I was working a ranch in Colorado. The owner, a man named Samuel Morrison, had a daughter named Eleanor. She was 19, beautiful, smart, full of life. Her father had debts to bad people. When he could not pay, they came and they took her, said she would work it off in their saloon. Everyone knew what that meant. His voice had gone flat, emotionless, but Victoria could hear the pain underneath. Samuel tried to stop them. They shot him dead in his own yard. Then they took Eleanor anyway. I was working the far pasture when it happened. By the time I got back, it was over. Victoria's hand went to her throat. What happened to her? I went to the saloon that night with every dollar I had saved, trying to buy her free. But they said she was not for sale, said she needed to learn her place first. I tried going to the law. The sheriff laughed in my face, said Samuel had made his bed and his daughter could lie in it. Matthew's jaw clenched. 3 weeks later, Eleanor was found in the river. The official report said she fell in while drunk. Everyone knew the truth. "I am so sorry," Victoria whispered. Matthew turned back to her. "I swore that day that if I ever had the chance to stop something like that from happening again, I would take it, no matter the cost. Today I had that chance, so I took it. And now you have a choice, a real choice about what happens next in your life. That is all I want to give you, Victoria." The choice that Eleanor never got. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Victoria looked at this man who had quite literally bought her freedom, who was asking nothing in return, who was offering her something no one had offered since her parents died, agency over her own life. "I want to come to your ranch," she said. "At least for now. I have nowhere else to go, no money of my own, no family worth speaking of. And I think I would like to get to know the kind of man who would do what you did today." Something that might have been relief crossed Matthew's face. "All right then. We can camp here tonight and reach the ranch by tomorrow afternoon. I have supplies in my saddlebags, enough for a simple meal. Is that acceptable?" "More than acceptable," Victoria said. "But Matthew, I need you to understand something. I do not know what the future holds or what I want from my life right now. Everything I thought I knew was stripped away today. I am grateful for what you did, more grateful than I can express, but I cannot promise you anything." "I am not asking for promises," Matthew said gently. "I am just offering you a place to figure things out. Take all the time you need." They made camp in the shelter of the cottonwood trees. Matthew proved to be efficient and capable, quickly building a small fire and pulling supplies from his saddlebags: coffee, dried beef, hardtack, and a tin of peaches that he said he had been saving for a special occasion. They ate in companionable silence as the stars began to emerge overhead. Victoria found herself studying Matthew when she thought he was not looking, trying to understand this man who had upended her life so completely. After they finished eating, Matthew spread out his bedroll on one side of the fire and created a makeshift pallet for Victoria on the other side using his saddle blanket and his coat. "I apologize for the rough accommodations," he said. "I was not planning on company when I set out this morning." "It is fine," Victoria assured him. "Better than fine, actually. Better than what I was facing." They settled down to sleep, the fire crackling between them. Victoria lay on her side, watching the flames dance and trying to process everything that had happened. This morning she had woken up in her small room above her uncle's store, sick with dread about the auction. Now she was lying under the stars with a stranger who had become her unlikely savior. Her whole life had pivoted on a single moment, a single decision by a man she barely knew: Matthew. She said softly into the darkness. Yes, were you in love with her? With Alina? There was a long pause. I thought I might be, he finally said. Or that I could have been, given time, but I never got the chance to find out. She was just the boss's daughter and I was just a ranch hand. After she died, I could not stay in Colorado. Too many ghosts. So I drifted for a while, worked different ranches, saved my money. A year ago, I found the land near the Solomon River and bought it outright. Been building it up ever since. The $5,000 you spent today, Victoria said. That was your savings, was it not? Everything you had worked for. Most of it, Matthew admitted. But money can be earned again. Lives cannot be brought back. Chances cannot be reclaimed. I made a choice and I stand by it. Victoria felt something shift in her chest. Some ice she had not known was there beginning to thaw. Thank you, she whispered. Truly, thank you. Get some rest, Matthew said. Tomorrow will be a long day. Victoria closed her eyes, but sleep was slow to come. Her mind kept returning to the moment Matthew had spoken up at the auction, the way his voice had cut through the chaos, clear and commanding. And then his words to her afterward. You choose your future. 3 words that meant everything. 3 words that gave her back something she had thought lost forever. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Morning light filtered through the cottonwood leaves, dappling everything in gold and green. Matthew was crouched by the fire, cooking breakfast with the same quiet efficiency he had shown the night before. When he saw she was awake, he gave her a small smile. Morning, he said. Hope you slept all right. Better than I expected, Victoria said truthfully. She sat up and finger-combed her hair as best she could, aware that she must look a mess. How long have you been up? Not long. Hour maybe. Wanted to get an early start. He handed her a tin cup of coffee and a plate with bacon and the last of the hardtack. It is not fancy, but it will keep you going until we reach the ranch. They ate quickly and broke camp. Soon they were back on the horse, riding north across the prairie. The morning was cool and pleasant, the worst of the summer heat still hours away. Victoria found herself relaxing slightly, some of the tension that had been coiled in her shoulders since the auction finally beginning to ease. As they rode, Matthew pointed out landmarks and told her about the area. He showed her where the best water sources were, which plants were safe to eat, how to read the land for signs of weather or animals. Victoria listened carefully, storing away the information. She had grown up in St. Louis, a city girl through and through, and her 3 years in Salina had not prepared her for life on the open prairie. But she was a quick learner, and she was determined not to be a burden. Around noon, they stopped at a small stream to water the horse and stretch their legs. Victoria knelt by the water, splashing some on her face and neck. The coolness felt wonderful. When she looked up, she found Matthew watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "What is it?" she asked. He shook his head slightly. "Nothing. I was just thinking that you are handling all of this remarkably well. Most people would be more shaken up." "Who says I am not shaken up?" Victoria countered. "I am terrified, actually. My entire life has been turned upside down and I am riding off into the wilderness with a man I do not know. For all I know, you could be a murderer or a thief or worse. But you do not think I am," Matthew said. "It was not a question." "No," Victoria admitted. "I do not think you are. Something in my gut tells me you are exactly what you appear to be, a good man trying to do the right thing. And my instincts about people are usually sound, but that does not mean I am not afraid." "Fair enough," Matthew said. He offered her his hand and pulled her to her feet. "For what it is worth, I am not going to let anything bad happen to you. You have my word on that." "Why?" Victoria asked, the question that had been circling her mind since yesterday finally coming to the surface. "Why do you care so much about a stranger? Is it really just because of what happened to Alina?" Matthew considered this for a long moment. "Partly," he said, "but also because I know what it is like to be powerless. My parents died when I was 14. Fever took them both within a week of each other. I ended up in an orphanage in Missouri, a bad place run by a man who thought beatings built character. I ran away when I was 16 and have been on my own ever since. I spent years being told I was worthless, that I would never amount to anything. So when I see someone being stripped of their power and dignity the way you were yesterday, it strikes a chord. I guess I want to be the person I needed when I was younger." Victoria felt her throat tighten. "You are a rare man, Matthew Travis." "I am just a man," he said. "Nothing more, nothing less. Come on, we should keep moving. Few more hours and we will be home. Home." The word felt strange and hopeful all at once. Victoria had not had a real home since her parents died. Her uncle's store had been a place to sleep and work, nothing more. But the way Matthew said the word, with a note of pride and warmth, made her curious to see what kind of place he had built. They reached the ranch in the late afternoon. It sat in a small valley near the Solomon River, sheltered by low hills and surrounded by good grassland. The cabin was modest but solidly built, with a stone chimney and real glass windows that must have cost a fortune to transport out here. There was a small barn, a corral with half a dozen horses, and several other outbuildings in various states of completion. It was not much by the standards of the big ranches Victoria had heard about, but it was clean and well maintained, and it spoke of careful planning and hard work. "It is wonderful," Victoria said honestly as they rode into the yard. Matthew looked pleased. "Thank you. I built most of it myself over the past year. Still have a lot of work to do, but it is coming along." He dismounted and helped her down. "Let me show you around." He gave her a tour of the property, pointing out where he wanted to expand the barn, where he planned to plant a vegetable garden next spring, the small creek that provided fresh water year-round. His enthusiasm was infectious, and Victoria found herself catching glimpses of the man beneath the quiet exterior, someone who dreamed big and worked hard to make those dreams real. The cabin interior was simple but comfortable. One large room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A ladder led to a sleeping loft under the eaves. Matthew showed her a small room off the main space, barely more than a closet but with a narrow bed and a chest of drawers. "This was supposed to be storage," he said, "but I can clear it out for you. It is not much, but it is private and it has a door that locks from the inside." The detail about the lock did not escape Victoria's notice. He was making it clear that she would be safe here, that he would not intrude on her space. "It is perfect," she said. "Truly." Matthew looked relieved. "Good, I will get your things." He paused. "Though I suppose you do not have any things, do you?" "Just the dress I am wearing," Victoria said with a rueful smile. "I was not exactly given time to pack yesterday morning." "Right. Well, I have an extra shirt and some pants that will probably be too big for you, but they will do until we can get you some proper clothes. There is a seamstress in the town of Bennington about 8 miles east of here. We can ride over there in a few days." Over the next few hours, Matthew helped Victoria get settled. He cleared out the small room, brought in fresh straw for the mattress, and gave her clean linens for the bed. He showed her where everything was in the kitchen and told her to help herself to whatever food she needed. True to his word, he gave her one of his shirts and a pair of pants, both of which hung off her frame like a scarecrow's clothes, but they were clean and they were hers to use. As evening fell, Matthew made dinner. Venison stew with vegetables from a small garden Victoria had not noticed earlier, and fresh bread that he had apparently baked that morning before riding into Salina. The man was full of surprises. They ate at a small wooden table, the atmosphere somehow both awkward and comfortable at once. Victoria was acutely aware that they were alone out here, that propriety would demand she be somewhere, anywhere else than unchaperoned with a single man. But propriety had not protected her from being sold like cattle, so she was inclined to ignore its rules for now. "Tell me about your parents," Matthew said as they ate, "if you do not mind talking about it." Victoria set down her spoon. "They were good people," she said. "My father was a banker and my mother was a teacher before she married. They gave me a wonderful childhood full of books and music and love. When the fever came, it happened so fast. One week they were healthy, the next they were gone. I was 19, old enough to inherit their house but too young to really know what to do. My father's business partner helped me settle the estate. There was some money, but not as much as I expected. Debts I had not known about. My uncle in Kansas wrote and said I could come live with him and work in his store. It seemed like the best option at the time." "Do you regret coming to Kansas?" Matthew asked. "I did," Victoria admitted. "Especially after I realized what kind of man my uncle really was. Weak, easily manipulated, more interested in cards and drink than in building a real business. But if I had not come to Kansas, I would not be sitting here right now. Strange how life works sometimes." "What would you have done if you had stayed in St. Louis?" Matthew asked. "I am not sure," Victoria said thoughtfully. "I loved learning. If I had been born a man, I think I would have wanted to be a teacher like my mother, or maybe a lawyer. But those paths are not open to women, at least not in any meaningful way. I suppose I would have eventually married whoever seemed like a good prospect and made the best of it. That is what most women do, is it not?" "Seems like a raw deal to me," Matthew said. "Having your whole life laid out for you with no real say in the matter." "That is what made yesterday so terrifying," Victoria said softly. "I was losing even the illusion of choice. At least if I had married, I could have told myself I chose my husband. But being sold, being reduced to property, that was the final stripping away of any agency I had left." Matthew's expression darkened. "Your uncle should be horsewhipped for what he did to you." "My uncle is a coward," Victoria said. "I do not forgive him, but I almost pity him. To be so weak that you would sell your own niece to save yourself, that is a special kind of hell to live with." They finished dinner, and Matthew insisted on cleaning up while Victoria went outside to watch the sunset. The sky was a riot of pink and orange and purple, the colors reflecting off the river in the distance. The air smelled of grass and earth, and the faint smoke from the chimney. It was beautiful and peaceful, and so far removed from the chaos of yesterday that Victoria felt like she had stepped into a different world. She heard Matthew come up behind her, his footsteps quiet on the grass. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink below the horizon. "What are you thinking about?" Matthew asked after a while. "I am thinking that I do not know what comes next," Victoria said honestly. "For the first time in my life, I have no plan, no clear path forward. It is terrifying and liberating all at once." "You do not have to figure it all out tonight," Matthew said. "Take it one day at a time. That is all any of us can do." Victoria turned to look at him, his profile sharp against the fading light. "Can I ask you something? Anything? What do you want from your life?" "Not from me, but for yourself. What are your dreams?" Matthew was quiet for a long moment. "I want to build something that lasts," he finally said. "This ranch, I want it to grow into something I can be proud of. Maybe eventually hire some hands, build it up to where I can run a real herd. I want a place where I belong, where I can put down roots. And someday, maybe, I would like a family. Wife, children, the whole thing, but I am in no hurry. I have got time." "You are 29, Victoria guessed. 28, Matthew corrected with a small smile. 29 in October." "How did you know?" "You have that look," Victoria said. "Old enough to have seen hard things, but young enough to still believe they can get better." Wise words from someone who is what, 20? 22, Victoria said with mock indignation. 23 in December. Matthew laughed, a real laugh that transformed his whole face. "My apologies, madam. 22 is positively ancient." Victoria found herself laughing too, the sound surprising her. When was the last time she had laughed? She could not remember. Certainly not in the last few months, as her uncle's debts mounted and the atmosphere in the store grew increasingly tense. "Thank you for this," she said when the laughter faded, "for giving me a reason to laugh again." "Anytime," Matthew said. His expression grew more serious. "Victoria, I want you to know that whatever happens, however long you decide to stay here, you are safe. Not just physically safe, though I will protect you with my life if it comes to that, but safe to be yourself, to figure out what you want, to make mistakes and change your mind. You are not a prisoner here, and you are not property. You are a guest, and I hope, maybe eventually a friend." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes for the second time since meeting this remarkable man. "I would like that," she whispered. "The friend part, I mean." They stayed outside until full dark, talking about small things and large things and everything in between. Matthew told her about his plans for the ranch, about the market for cattle and the challenges of making a living in this hard land. Victoria talked about her love of books and her frustration with the limitations placed on women's lives. They discovered shared opinions about politics and disagreements about the best way to make coffee. It was the kind of conversation Victoria had not had since her parents died, the kind where you could say what you really thought without weighing every word. Finally, as the night grew cold, they went back inside. Matthew banked the fire and lit a lantern. "I will be up in the loft if you need anything," he said. "But you should not. Sleep well, Victoria. You too, Matthew, and thank you again." He gave her a small nod and climbed the ladder to the loft. Victoria went to her small room and closed the door, testing the lock as Matthew had pointed out. It worked smoothly. She changed into the oversized shirt he had given her, which hung down to her knees like a nightgown, and climbed into the narrow bed. The mattress was surprisingly comfortable and the blankets were warm. Through the small window, she could see stars scattered across the black sky like diamonds on velvet. From the main room, she could hear the quiet sounds of Matthew settling down for the night. She felt safe, she realized. For the first time since her parents died, maybe for the first time since childhood, she felt truly safe. She fell asleep with that thought wrapped around her like a blanket. The next few weeks fell into a pattern that felt both strange and natural. Victoria woke each morning to find Matthew already up and working, feeding the horses or mending fences, or doing one of the 1,000 tasks that keeping a ranch running required. She took over the cooking and the housekeeping without being asked, partly because she wanted to contribute and partly because she needed something to occupy her hands and mind. Matthew had been true to his word about not expecting anything from her, but Victoria found that she wanted to help. She liked cooking for someone who appreciated good food. She liked the satisfaction of keeping the cabin tidy. And gradually, as her confidence grew, she started venturing outside to help with the outdoor work as well. Matthew taught her how to care for the horses, how to mend tack, how to identify different plants and their uses. He was a patient teacher, never condescending, always willing to explain things as many times as she needed. In turn, Victoria shared the knowledge she had. She was better educated than Matthew, having had the benefit of good schools, and she started teaching him things her mother had taught her. She helped him with his accounting, setting up a proper system for tracking expenses and income. She read to him in the evenings from the few books he had, and he listened with the focused attention of someone hungry for learning. In the third week, true to his word, Matthew took her to Bennington to see the seamstress. The woman, Mrs. Fletcher, was kind and did not ask too many questions about why Victoria needed a whole new wardrobe. Matthew gave Victoria enough money to buy 3 dresses, a riding skirt, and all the necessary undergarments and accessories. When Victoria protested the expense, he just shook his head. "You need proper clothes," he said. "Consider it part of your wages." "I am not working for wages," Victoria pointed out. "You said I did not owe you anything." "Then consider it a gift from a friend to a friend," Matthew said firmly. "We are not having this argument, Victoria. Buy the clothes." While Mrs. Fletcher took measurements and showed Victoria fabric samples, Matthew excused himself to run other errands. He returned 2 hours later with supplies and something else. A beautiful leather-bound book, brand new. "I noticed you had finished all my books," he said, handing it to Victoria. "Thought you might like something new to read." Victoria took the book with trembling hands. It was a collection of poetry by Walt Whitman. She looked up at Matthew, unable to speak for a moment. The gift was thoughtful and personal, and it showed he had been paying attention to her preferences in literature. "Thank you," she finally managed. "This is incredibly kind." Matthew looked embarrassed. "It is just a book, no big thing." But it was a big thing. It was another sign that he saw her as a person, as someone whose interests and desires mattered. It was the kind of gift you gave someone you cared about. On the ride back to the ranch, Victoria found herself studying Matthew again. Over the past few weeks, she had learned so much about him. She knew that he hummed tunelessly when he worked, that he had a horror of waste, that he could not draw to save his life but had beautiful handwriting. She knew he was kind to animals and patient with frustration, and that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her by surprise. She knew he was lonely, though he would never admit it, and that he carried the weight of past failures heavily even though none of them had truly been his fault. What she did not know was how she felt about him. Gratitude, certainly. Respect, absolutely. But was there something more? The question troubled her, because she could not afford to let her feelings cloud her judgment. Matthew had given her the freedom to choose her own future, and she would not betray that gift by rushing into something she was not ready for. But when he smiled at something she said, or when their hands accidentally brushed as they worked together, or when she caught him watching her with an expression of wonder on his face that he quickly hid, she felt something flutter in her chest that was more than friendship. One evening in early September, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Matthew brought up a subject they had been carefully avoiding. "You have been here almost a month now," he said. "Are you happy? Is this where you want to be?" Victoria considered the question carefully. "Yes," she said. "I am happy. Happier than I have been in a long time, actually, but I do not want you to think I am taking advantage of your hospitality." "You are not," Matthew said firmly. "You have been working as hard as any ranch hand I could hire and better than most. The cabin has never been so organized. I am eating better than I have in years, and you somehow managed to make sense of my disaster of an accounting system. If anything, I am taking advantage of you." "Then we are even," Victoria said with a smile. "You gave me back my freedom and I am giving you proper bookkeeping. Fair trade." Matthew laughed. "When you put it like that, I definitely got the better end of the deal." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, then Matthew cleared his throat. "Victoria, there is something I need to tell you. Tomorrow I am riding to Abilene to sell some horses. I will be gone for 3 days, maybe 4. I wanted to ask if you would be all right here alone, or if you would rather come with me." Victoria felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of being alone, but she pushed it down. She was not a child, and this was not St. Louis. She knew how to handle a rifle now, thanks to Matthew's lessons, and she knew the property well enough to manage for a few days. "I will be fine here," she said. "But I appreciate you asking. Are you sure? Abilene can be rough, but I can keep you safe there. Or if you would rather, we could see if Mrs. Fletcher in Bennington would let you stay with her." The offer was tempting, but Victoria shook her head. "I need to learn to be on my own," she said. "Not dependent on anyone for my sense of safety. This is a good opportunity to test myself." Matthew looked at her with something like admiration. "You are braver than you give yourself credit for, or more stubborn," Victoria said. "My mother always said I had a stubborn streak a mile wide." "Stubborn is good," Matthew said. "Stubborn keeps you alive out here." He left early the next morning, leading a string of 5 horses he had trained for sale. Before he rode out, he gave Victoria detailed instructions about what to do in various emergencies, made her promise to keep the rifle loaded and close at hand, and told her 3 times where he had hidden extra money in case she needed it. "I will be fine," Victoria assured him, amused and touched by his concern. "Go sell your horses and get a good price. I will see you in a few days." Matthew hesitated, then quickly squeezed her hand. "Stay safe, Victoria. You too, Matthew." She watched him ride out, the horses trailing behind him in a well-trained line. When he disappeared over the rise, she felt a pang of something that might have been loneliness. But she had meant what she said. She needed to prove to herself that she could stand on her own, that she was not just trading one form of dependence for another. The first day alone went well. Victoria kept busy with chores, tended the remaining horses, and worked on the garden. In the evening, she read her new book by lamplight and felt quite pleased with herself for managing so capably. The second day started well but ended with trouble. She was in the garden in the late afternoon when she heard the sound of horses approaching. Multiple horses. She straightened up, shading her eyes, and felt her stomach drop as she recognized one of the riders. It was Marcus Dalton, the cattle baron from Salina, accompanied by 3 of his men. They rode into the yard like they owned it, spreading out to block any escape routes. Victoria's hand went to her apron pocket, where she had taken to carrying a small knife. But she knew it would be useless against 4 armed men. Dalton dismounted, his expensive clothes dusty from travel. Up close, he was even more intimidating than Victoria remembered, with cold eyes and a mouth like a trap. "Miss Thornton," he said, his voice oily. "What a pleasure to see you again, though I must say I am surprised to find you here alone. Where is your owner?" Victoria lifted her chin. "Matthew Travis is not my owner, and he is away on business." "How convenient," Dalton said. He gestured to his men to dismount. "I have been meaning to pay a visit to Mr. Travis. You see, there is a matter of a transaction that needs to be discussed. I believe he may have obtained you under false pretenses." "I do not know what you mean," Victoria said, backing toward the cabin. If she could get inside, she could get the rifle. "Do not play dumb, girl. Travis paid for you with stolen gold. Gold that went missing from one of my shipments 2 months ago, which means the transaction was invalid and you still belong to whoever had the winning legitimate bid at the auction." Dalton smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "That would be Mr. Peterson, the saloon owner. However, he has agreed to sell his claim to me, which means, my dear, that you are coming back to Salina with us." "That is a lie," Victoria said firmly, even though her heart was pounding. "Matthew is an honest man. He would never steal." "I have proof," Dalton said. "The serial numbers on the gold coins match my missing shipment. The sheriff in Salina has issued a warrant for Travis's arrest. You can come peacefully, or we can make this difficult, your choice." Victoria's mind raced. Was it possible? Could Matthew have lied to her about where the money came from? No, she did not believe it. Matthew was honest to his core. But even if Dalton was lying, which she suspected he was, she was alone and outnumbered. If she tried to fight, they would simply overpower her. "I need to get my things from the cabin," she said, stalling for time. "Fine, but make it quick. And do not try anything stupid. My men are not known for their patience." Victoria walked toward the cabin, her mind whirling. The rifle was just inside the door. If she could get to it, if she could get off a shot or two, maybe she could scare them off. Or maybe she would just get herself killed. But what was the alternative? Let them take her back to Selena, back to that saloon, back to a fate worse than death. She reached the door and pushed it open. The rifle was leaning against the wall just where Matthew had left it. She grabbed it and spun around, bringing it to her shoulder. "Stay back," she shouted. "I know how to use this and I will shoot if you come any closer." Dalton's men had their hands on their guns, but Dalton raised a hand to stop them. He looked more amused than concerned. "Now, Miss Thornton, let us not be hasty. You are outnumbered 4-1. Even if you get one of us, the others will get you. And then you will have murdered someone, which is a hanging offense. Is that really how you want this to end?" "I would rather hang than go back with you," Victoria said, and she meant it. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. Dalton's amusement faded. "Stubborn little thing, are you not? Fine. We will do this the hard way. Boys." The three men spread out, moving to flank the cabin. Victoria swung the rifle between them, trying to keep them all in view, but they were experienced at this, and she was not. She saw too late that one of them had circled around the side of the cabin. He lunged out and grabbed the rifle barrel, yanking it from her hands. Victoria screamed and tried to fight, but another man grabbed her from behind, pinning her arms. She kicked and struggled, fury and terror making her wild. "Let me go. You have no right." "We have every right," Dalton said coldly. "You are property, Miss Thornton. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be." "I am not property. I am a human being. In this territory, you are whatever the law says you are, and the law says you belong to me now." They were dragging her toward the horses when a voice rang out across the yard, clear and hard as steel. "Let her go. Now." Everyone froze. Victoria twisted in her captor's grip and felt her heart leap. Matthew was sitting on his horse at the edge of the yard, his rifle raised and aimed directly at Marcus Dalton's chest. He must have ridden hard to get back early, and he looked like avenging fury made flesh. "Travis," Dalton said, his voice carefully neutral, "you are back sooner than expected." "Let her go," Matthew repeated. "I will not ask a third time." "I am afraid I cannot do that," Dalton said. "You see, there is a warrant out for your arrest. That gold you used to pay for the girl was stolen from me, which makes you a thief and the transaction invalid." "That is a lie and you know it," Matthew said. "That gold came from the sale of land I owned in Colorado. I have the paperwork to prove it." "Do you really?" Dalton sounded genuinely curious. "Because I have a sheriff who says otherwise. Now, we can settle this like civilized men or someone can get hurt. Your choice." "My choice is you let Victoria go right now, get on your horses and get off my land. If you are not gone in the next 10 seconds, I start shooting." The tension in the yard was thick enough to cut. Victoria could see Matthew's finger on the trigger, could see the cold determination in his eyes. He would do it, she realized. He would actually start shooting if Dalton did not back down. Dalton must have seen it too because he nodded slowly. "All right, we are leaving. But this is not over, Travis. I will be back with the law, proper paperwork, and enough men that you cannot fight us off with one rifle. And when I come back, I am taking what is mine." "She is not yours," Matthew said flatly. "She is not anyone's. Now get moving." The man holding Victoria released her, and she stumbled forward. Matthew did not lower his rifle until Dalton and his men had mounted and started riding out. Even then, he kept the weapon ready until they were out of sight over the rise. Only then did he dismount and run to Victoria, who had collapsed on the ground, shaking with reaction. He dropped to his knees beside her, the rifle forgotten, his hands hovering over her like he wanted to touch her but was not sure if he should. "Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" Victoria shook her head, unable to speak. Now that the danger had passed, all the fear she had been holding at bay came flooding out. She started crying harsh sobs that shook her whole body. Hey, it is all right. You are safe now. I have got you." Matthew pulled her into his arms, holding her close as she cried. One hand stroked her hair while the other held her securely against his chest. "You are safe. I am so sorry I was not here. I sold the horses faster than expected and decided to come home early. Thank God I did." "He said you stole the gold," Victoria gasped out between sobs. "He said there was a warrant for your arrest." "He was lying," Matthew said firmly. "I have all the documentation for that money. My Colorado land sale went through a bank in Denver. Everything is legal and above board. Dalton is making up charges to try to overturn the auction result." "Why does he care so much?" Victoria asked. "Why would he go to all this trouble for one person?" Matthew's expression darkened. "Because men like Dalton do not like being thwarted. He probably had plans for you, or he promised you to someone as a favor. Or maybe he just does not like that someone stood up to him in front of the whole town. Whatever the reason, he is not going to let this go." Victoria pulled back slightly so she could see Matthew's face. "What are we going to do?" "We are going to fight," Matthew said, "and we are going to win. But first, we are getting you somewhere safe. Pack whatever you need. We are leaving tonight." "Leaving, but this is your home, your ranch. And it will be here when we get back," Matthew said. "But right now, keeping you safe is more important than any piece of land. Come on. We do not have much time." If Dalton was telling the truth about the warrant, he might be back with the sheriff before morning. They worked quickly, throwing supplies and necessities into saddlebags. Matthew saddled 2 horses and loaded them with everything they might need for an extended journey. As they worked, he explained his plan. "We are going to Dodge City," he said. "It is about 150 miles southwest of here. I have a friend there, a lawyer named David Mitchell. He helped me with the land purchase for this ranch. If anyone can cut through Dalton's lies and prove the gold was legitimate, it is him. Plus, Dodge City is big enough that Dalton cannot control the law the way he does in Salina." "How long will it take to get there?" Victoria asked. 5 days if we push hard. Maybe a week if we need to be careful and avoid the main roads." They finished loading the horses as the sun set. Matthew took a last look around the cabin, his face tight with frustration and anger. Victoria could see how much it cost him to leave, even temporarily. This ranch was his dream, his future, and he was abandoning it to keep her safe. "Matthew, maybe I should just leave on my own," she said impulsively. "Go to California or Oregon, somewhere Dalton will never find me. Then you could stay here and defend your property." Matthew turned to her, his expression fierce. "No, absolutely not. You are not facing this alone. We are in this together now, Victoria, partners, friends, and friends do not abandon each other when things get hard." "But your ranch will still be here when we get back," Matthew repeated. "Buildings can be rebuilt, fences can be mended, cattle can be replaced. But you, Victoria Thornton, are irreplaceable. And I will burn this entire ranch to the ground before I let Dalton or anyone else take you." Victoria felt her breath catch. The intensity in Matthew's eyes, the raw emotion in his voice, it made something in her chest tighten and expand all at once. This was not just about Alina anymore, about making up for past failures. This was about her. Matthew was putting everything on the line for her specifically, not for some abstract principle but for her as a person he cared about. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for caring." Matthew's expression softened. "It is not hard to care about you, Victoria. It is actually the easiest thing in the world." They stood there for a moment, the charged air between them humming with unspoken feelings. Then Matthew cleared his throat and stepped back. "We should go. Every minute we wait is a minute closer to Dalton coming back." They rode out under the cover of darkness, heading southwest across the prairie. Matthew set a hard pace, pushing the horses as much as he dared. Victoria did her best to keep up, grateful for all the riding practice she had gotten over the past month. Her legs ached and her back was sore, but she did not complain. If Matthew could ride through the night to keep her safe, she could endure a little discomfort. They rode until the moon was high overhead, then stopped to rest the horses and catch a few hours of sleep. Matthew found a small depression in the land that would hide them from casual observation, and they made a cold camp with no fire. They ate dried meat and hardtack, washing it down with water from their canteens. "Try to sleep," Matthew said, spreading out bedrolls. "I will take first watch." "Wake me in a few hours and I will take a turn," Victoria said. "You need sleep too." "Victoria, I am serious, Matthew. We are partners, remember? That means we share the burden. Now promise me you will wake me for my turn at watch." Matthew smiled slightly. "You are stubborn, you know that." "So I have been told. Promise." "I promise." Victoria lay down on the bedroll, wrapped in a blanket against the cool night air. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was slow to come. Her mind kept replaying the confrontation with Dalton, the terror she had felt, the fury in Matthew's voice when he had told them to let her go. She had never had anyone fight for her like that before. Her parents had loved her, but they had been taken before they could protect her from the cruelties of the world. Her uncle had sold her rather than fight for her. But Matthew, who had known her only a few weeks, was willing to risk everything to keep her safe. When had she fallen in love with him? She could not pinpoint an exact moment. Maybe it had been when he first held out his hand to help her down from the auction platform. Maybe it had been during one of those quiet evenings on the porch, talking about dreams and futures. Maybe it had been this afternoon when he had ridden in like a hero from one of her books, ready to face down 4 armed men to save her. Or maybe it had been growing slowly all along, a steady accretion of small moments and kindnesses and shared laughter. Maybe love did not always arrive like lightning. Maybe sometimes it crept up on you like sunrise, so gradual you did not notice until suddenly the whole world was bright. But knowing she loved him and knowing what to do about it were two different things. Matthew had given her freedom and choice. If she declared her feelings now, in the middle of this crisis when they were dependent on each other for survival, would that be a real choice or just circumstance? And what if he did not feel the same way? What if his feelings were still tangled up with Alina, with guilt and unfinished business? She was still wrestling with these thoughts when she finally fell asleep. True to his word, Matthew woke her after a few hours to take her turn at watch. She sat up, stiff and sore, and took the position he indicated while he lay down to rest. She watched the stars wheel overhead and listened to the sounds of the prairie at night. Wind in the grass, distant coyotes, the quiet breathing of the horses. And softer still, the sound of Matthew sleeping, occasionally murmuring something she could not make out. She watched over him as he had watched over her, and felt the weight of her love for him settle into her bones like certainty. They were back on the move before dawn, riding hard through another long day. By evening, Victoria was so sore she could barely sit straight in the saddle, but Matthew pushed them on for another few hours after sunset before finally calling a halt. They were near a small creek, and the sound of running water was almost unbearably welcome. "We can risk a fire tonight," Matthew said, surveying their surroundings. "We have put enough distance between us and the ranch that Dalton would have a hard time tracking us, especially in the dark." They made camp and Matthew built a small fire while Victoria saw to the horses. When she came back to the fire, he had coffee brewing and was frying bacon in a small pan. The smell was heavenly. They ate in companionable silence, too tired for much conversation. But after they finished, as they sat nursing cups of coffee, Matthew spoke. "I am sorry for dragging you into all this," he said, staring into the fire. "None of this would have happened if I had not bought you at that auction. You would still be in Salina, maybe married to Peterson by now, but at least you would not be running for your life." Victoria set down her coffee cup with a sharp click. "Do not you dare apologize for saving me," she said fiercely. "Do not you dare suggest I would be better off as some saloon keeper's property. You gave me back my life, Matthew. My actual life, not just survival but the chance to become whoever I want to be. So do not apologize for that, not ever." Matthew looked at her, surprise evident on his face. "I just meant I know what you meant, and you are wrong. Yes, this situation is difficult and dangerous. But I would rather be here with you, facing this together, than safe and owned by someone who saw me as a thing instead of a person. You have treated me with more respect and kindness in the past month than I have known in the past 3 years. So please, please do not regret what you did." "I do not regret it," Matthew said quietly. "I just hate that you are in danger because of me." "I am in danger because of Marcus Dalton and men like him," Victoria corrected. "You are the reason I have any chance of getting out of this danger. There is a difference." Matthew smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "When did you become so fierce?" "I was always fierce," Victoria said. "I just had not had a reason to show it in a long time." They held each other's gaze across the fire, and Victoria saw something shift in Matthew's expression. The careful distance he had been maintaining, the wall he had built to protect both of them, it wavered. For just a moment, she saw what lay beneath. Want and tenderness and a longing so intense it made her breath catch. Then he looked away, the wall slamming back into place. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be another long day." Victoria wanted to push, wanted to demand they talk about what was clearly growing between them, but she held back. He was right. Tomorrow would be a long day, and they needed their wits about them. There would be time for conversations about feelings later, when they were safe. At least, she hoped there would be. The next 3 days passed in a blur of hard riding and cold camps. They avoided towns and main roads, sticking to less traveled paths where they were less likely to run into anyone who might report their location to Dalton. Matthew proved to be an excellent tracker and guide, always seeming to know which way to go even when Victoria could see no landmarks. On the 4th day, they ran into their first real problem. They had stopped at a small stream to water the horses when they heard riders approaching fast. Matthew cursed under his breath and pulled Victoria behind a stand of scrub trees. "Do not make a sound," he whispered. They watched as 5 men rode past, heading northeast. They were too far away to see clearly, but Victoria would swear one of them was wearing the distinctive red vest that Dalton's foreman always wore. "Are they tracking us?" Victoria whispered once the riders were out of earshot. "Maybe. Or maybe they are just patrolling the area, hoping to get lucky. Either way, we need to be more careful. They are between us and Dodge City now." They waited an hour to be safe, then set out again, this time heading due west for several miles before turning back southwest. The detour cost them time, but it could not be helped. By the time they made camp that night, Victoria could see the strain on Matthew's face. "How much farther?" she asked. Maybe 2 days if we are lucky and can make good time tomorrow. 3 if we have to keep dodging Dalton's men. And when we get to Dodge City, will we really be safe there? Matthew hesitated. Safer than we are out here in the open. Dalton has less influence in Dodge City than he does in Salina. And my friend David is a good lawyer. If anyone can fight this, he can. But you are not certain, Victoria said. No, Matthew admitted. I am not certain. Dalton has money and connections. He can make life difficult even in a place where he does not control the law. But it is the best chance we have. Victoria nodded, accepting this. Then we keep going. And we deal with whatever comes. Matthew looked at her with something like wonder. How are you so calm about all this? Most people would be falling apart by now. I fell apart yesterday when I was crying in your arms, remember? Victoria said with a slight smile. But I cannot afford to fall apart every day. And honestly, as frightening as this is, I feel more alive than I have in years. I am making choices, taking action, fighting for my future. That means something. You are remarkable, Matthew said softly. I hope you know that. Victoria felt heat rise to her cheeks. I am just doing what needs to be done. Same as you. No, Matthew said. It is more than that. You have courage and strength and a good heart. Alina had those qualities too. That is why I wanted to help her. But you, Victoria, you are not just someone I am trying to save. You are someone I admire, someone I care about deeply. The air between them grew charged again. Victoria's heart was pounding so hard she was sure Matthew must be able to hear it. This was the moment. He had opened the door. All she had to do was walk through it. Matthew, I need to tell you something, she began. But before she could continue, they heard a sound that made them both freeze, the click of a gun being cocked. Do not move, a voice said from the darkness beyond the firelight. Either of you. 3 men stepped into the circle of light, guns drawn. They were rough-looking characters, the kind of drifters and hired guns that populated the frontier. Not Dalton's men, Victoria realized, but something potentially worse. Opportunists who had stumbled upon what looked like an easy target. Well, what have we here? The leader said, a scarred man with a cruel smile. A young couple out for a romantic ride. How sweet. Matthew had gone very still beside her, his hand resting near his gun but not touching it. We do not want any trouble, he said evenly. Take our supplies if you want them. Just let us go. Oh, we will be taking your supplies, the leader agreed, and your horses, and your money. And maybe we will take your lady friend there for some entertainment. She looks like she could be real friendly. That is not happening, Matthew said, and there was death in his voice. The leader laughed. You are outnumbered, friend. You try anything and you are dead. Then we still get everything we want, plus we do not have to listen to you complain about it. Victoria could see Matthew calculating odds, looking for an opening. But there were 3 guns pointed at them and only darkness at their backs. Any move he made would get him killed, unless she gave him an opening. Without giving herself time to think about it, Victoria suddenly lurched to her feet, stumbling toward the fire as if dizzy. I do not feel well, she gasped, swaying dramatically. It was not much of a distraction, but it was enough. All 3 men looked at her for just a moment. In that moment, Matthew moved. His gun was out and firing before anyone could react. The first shot took the leader in the shoulder, spinning him around. The second shot hit the man on the left in the leg. Matthew was diving to the side even as he fired, rolling away from the firelight into the darkness. The third man got off a shot that went wide. Then Matthew's third shot came from a new position, and the man went down clutching his arm. In the space of perhaps 5 seconds, all 3 would-be robbers were on the ground, wounded but not dead. Matthew emerged from the shadows, his gun still trained on the 3 men. Victoria, get their weapons, quickly. Victoria did not hesitate. She ran forward and grabbed the dropped guns, tossing them into the darkness beyond the fire. The three men were groaning and cursing, but none of them looked like they were dying. Matthew had aimed to wound rather than kill, even in the heat of the moment. "We are leaving now," Matthew said coldly. "If you are smart, you will head to the nearest town for a doctor and you will forget you ever saw us. If you are stupid, you will try to follow us, and next time I will not be aiming for your shoulders and legs. Are we clear?" The men nodded frantically, clutching their wounds. Matthew kept his gun on them while he and Victoria quickly broke camp and saddled the horses. Within minutes, they were mounted and riding away into the night, leaving the wounded men and their problems behind. They rode hard for an hour before Matthew finally slowed the pace. "That was quick thinking back there," he said, "creating a distraction like that." "It was stupid and dangerous," Victoria said, her voice shaking slightly now that the adrenaline was wearing off. "You could have been killed. But I was not, and neither were you. That is what matters." Matthew reached over and squeezed her hand briefly before returning his attention to the trail. "You were very brave, Victoria." "I was terrified," she admitted. "Bravery is not the absence of fear. It is acting despite fear, and you did that beautifully." They rode through the rest of the night, not daring to stop for more than brief rests. By the time the sun rose, Victoria was swaying in the saddle from exhaustion. Matthew finally called a halt in a stand of trees near a small spring. "We will rest here for a few hours," he said. "I know you are tired. Hell, I am tired. But we are close now. Maybe one more day to Dodge City." They took care of the horses first, then collapsed on their bedrolls. Victoria was asleep almost before her head hit the rolled-up coat she was using as a pillow. She woke to find Matthew sitting near her watching the horizon. The sun was high overhead, suggesting she had slept for several hours. She sat up, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. "You should have woken me sooner," she said. "You need rest too." "I slept," Matthew said. "A little, enough." He turned to look at her, and she was struck by the intensity of his gaze. "Victoria, last night before those men showed up, you were about to say something. What was it?" Victoria's heart stuttered. In the chaos of the attack and the subsequent flight, she had almost forgotten that moment by the fire. But Matthew had not forgotten. He was asking her directly, no more avoiding or deflecting. She could play it safe. She could claim she did not remember or that it had not been important. But she was tired of being safe, tired of swallowing her own feelings, tired of letting fear dictate her choices. "I was going to tell you that I am falling in love with you," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "That somewhere along the way, you stopped being just my rescuer or my friend and became someone essential to my happiness. That the thought of losing you terrifies me more than any of the actual danger we are facing. I was going to tell you all of that, but then those men appeared and the moment passed. But you asked, so now you know." Matthew stared at her, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched out and Victoria felt panic rising. She had miscalculated. He did not feel the same way. She had ruined everything. Then Matthew moved. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, pulled her to her feet and kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss or a tentative one. It was desperate and passionate and full of all the emotion they had been holding back for weeks. Victoria kissed him back with everything she had, her hands fisting in his shirt, holding him close. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Matthew rested his forehead against hers. "I am in love with you too," he said, his voice rough. "I have been for weeks. Maybe since that first moment on the platform when you took my hand and trusted me enough to leave with me. I just did not think I had the right to say anything. You had just gotten your freedom and here I was wanting to bind you to me. It felt wrong." "It is not wrong," Victoria said fiercely. Love is not bondage, Matthew. At least it should not be. Love should set you free to be your best self, and that is what you do for me. You make me feel free and strong and capable of anything. That is not wrong. That is everything right. Matthew kissed her again, softer this time, sweeter. I do not know what the future holds, he said when they parted. I do not know if we can beat Dalton or if we will have to keep running. I do not know if I will still have a ranch to go back to or if we will have to start over somewhere new. But I know I want to face whatever comes with you beside me, if you will have me. Yes, Victoria said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, of course, yes. I will face anything with you, Matthew Travis. Anything and everything. They held each other as the afternoon sun beat down. Two people who had found in each other something they had not known they were looking for. A true partner, an equal match. A love that demanded nothing but gave everything. Finally, reluctantly, Matthew pulled back. We should keep moving. The sooner we get to Dodge City, the sooner we can start figuring out how to end this so we can actually have a future together. Agreed, Victoria said. Then, because she could, because he was hers and she was his, she kissed him one more time. But we are coming back to this conversation. I certainly hope so, Matthew said, grinning. It was the first time she had seen him look truly, unreservedly happy, and it took her breath away. They made it to Dodge City as the sun was setting the next day. Victoria had heard stories about Dodge, about how wild and lawless it was, but she was not prepared for the reality. The town sprawled along the Arkansas River, a jumble of buildings ranging from raw lumber to brick. The streets were crowded with cowboys, soldiers from nearby Fort Dodge, gamblers and prostitutes. Gunshots rang out somewhere in the distance, followed by raucous laughter. Stay close to me, Matthew said, guiding his horse through the chaos. Dodge City is not dangerous if you know how to navigate it, but it is easy to get into trouble if you do not. They made their way to a relatively quiet street where a neat sign proclaimed, David Mitchell, attorney at law. Matthew dismounted and helped Victoria down. They tied the horses and Matthew knocked on the door. A man opened it almost immediately, tall and thin with spectacles and ink-stained fingers. His face lit up when he saw Matthew. Matt, I did not expect to see you until next spring. Come in, come in. Then he noticed Victoria and his eyebrows rose. And you brought a companion. How intriguing. Inside, the office was crammed with books and papers, but there was an underlying order to the chaos. David Mitchell cleared space for them to sit and listened intently as Matthew explained everything that had happened. The auction, the rescue, Dalton's claims about stolen gold, the confrontation at the ranch, and their flight to Dodge City. When Matthew finished, David sat back and steepled his fingers. Well, he said, you certainly do not do anything by halves, do you, Matt? Can you help us? Victoria asked. David looked at her and she saw keen intelligence in his eyes. I can certainly try. The good news is that if you have documentation proving the gold was legitimate, which you say you do, then Dalton's claims are baseless. The problem is that he can make those claims anyway and tie you up in legal proceedings for months or even years. The law out here is not always rational or fair. So what do we do? Matthew asked. First, I need to see your documentation, all of it. The land sale papers from Colorado, the bank records, everything. We need to build an airtight case. Second, I need to file some paperwork with the territorial court to block any attempt by Dalton to seize either Miss Thornton or your property. That should buy us time. Third, and this is important, you two need to stay put for a while. Running makes you look guilty. If you are here, visible, going about your business, it sends a message that you have nothing to hide. How long is a while? Matthew asked. A few weeks, maybe a month. however long it takes to get this in front of a judge who is not in Dalton's pocket." David looked between them, noting the way Victoria was sitting close to Matthew, the way Matthew's hand had moved protectively toward her when David mentioned staying in Dodge. "I take it the relationship between you two is not simply that of rescuer and rescued." "We are together," Matthew said firmly, his hand finding Victoria's. "I love her. I am going to marry her if she will have me once this mess is sorted out." Victoria felt warmth flood through her. They had not discussed marriage explicitly, but hearing Matthew declare his intentions so clearly filled her with joy. David smiled. "Well then, congratulations are in order, though I would advise waiting until the legal situation is resolved before making it official. The last thing you need is for Dalton to claim the marriage is invalid because Victoria was supposedly his property at the time." "I am no one's property," Victoria said quietly but firmly. "No, you are not," David agreed, "and we are going to make sure the law agrees with that sentiment. Now, I assume you need a place to stay. I have a small house with a spare room. You are welcome to it." "We could not impose," Matthew began, but David waved him off. "Nonsense. You are doing me a favor. I have been looking for a case like this, something I can use to challenge some of the more archaic laws around debt and servitude in this territory. If we win this, and I believe we can, it could set a precedent that helps a lot of people. So you would actually be helping me. Plus, you are my friend, Matt. Of course I am going to help you." So it was settled. They moved into David's spare room, which was small but clean. David insisted they take the bed while he set up a cot in his office. Matthew protested, but David was immovable on the subject. Over the next week, David worked tirelessly to build their case. Matthew had been meticulous in keeping records, and he had indeed gone through a bank in Denver for his Colorado land sale. David sent telegrams to Denver requesting copies of all the relevant documents. He also filed motions with the territorial court and began the process of finding a judge who would hear their case fairly. Meanwhile, Matthew and Victoria tried to build some semblance of a normal life in Dodge City. It was strange, living in limbo like this, not knowing what the future held. But they made the best of it. Victoria found work helping at a boarding house run by a kind woman named Mrs. Henderson, who asked no questions about Victoria's past. The work was hard but honest, and it felt good to earn her own money. Matthew took on odd jobs around town, breaking horses, doing carpentry work, anything that would bring in some income. He hated being away from his ranch, Victoria knew, hated not knowing if Dalton's men were destroying everything he had built. But he bore it with quiet determination, always coming back to her at the end of each day with a smile and a kiss. One evening, about 2 weeks after they arrived in Dodge City, Matthew came home with a small package. They were alone in their room, David having gone out to meet with another lawyer about the case. "I have something for you," Matthew said, looking suddenly nervous. He handed her the package. Inside was a dress, simple but beautiful, made of soft blue fabric that matched her eyes. With it was a simple gold ring set with a small sapphire. "I know I said we should wait until the legal situation was resolved," Matthew began. "And we will wait to make it official, but I wanted you to have these. The dress because I have seen you wearing that same tired cotton dress every day, and I wanted you to have something nice that was really yours. And the ring because I want everyone to know that you are spoken for, that you have chosen me and I have chosen you." Victoria took the ring with trembling fingers. It was simple and beautiful, not expensive but meaningful. "Matthew, I love it. I love you. Marry me," Matthew said. "Not today, not officially, not until David says it is safe, but in our hearts, in our intentions, marry me. Be my partner, my wife, my future." "Yes," Victoria said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, of course, always yes. Matthew slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he pulled her close and kissed her, sweet and tender and full of promise. They made love that night for the first time, a careful exploration of each other that turned passionate and intense. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, Victoria's head on Matthew's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I could be this happy," Victoria whispered. "After my parents died, after my uncle's betrayal, I thought that part of my life was over. The part where I got to feel joy and hope and love. But you gave it all back to me." "You did the same for me," Matthew said, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "After Alina died, I was so angry and empty. I thought maybe I did not deserve to be happy. But then I saw you on that platform, looking so scared but so brave, and something in me woke up. You reminded me that life is worth fighting for, that love is worth the risk." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and Victoria dreamed of a future that finally seemed possible. The next morning, David burst into the house with news. "We have a court date," he announced. 3 weeks from today. Judge Morrison out of Topeka is coming through to handle some cases. He is fair and he is not influenced by the cattle barons. This is our chance." The next 3 weeks were tense. David prepared their case meticulously, and Victoria and Matthew provided every scrap of information they could. They learned that Dalton had indeed filed suit claiming ownership of Victoria and demanding return of his property. He was also pushing forward with the theft charges against Matthew, though those seemed to be floundering without any actual evidence. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. They walked into the courtroom together, Victoria in her blue dress and wearing her ring proudly, Matthew in his best clothes with his back straight and his head high. Dalton was there with 2 expensive lawyers, looking smug and confident. But Judge Morrison turned out to be everything David had promised: fair, thorough, and deeply skeptical of Dalton's claims. He listened to both sides present their cases. Dalton's lawyers argued that the gold used at the auction had been stolen, and therefore the transaction was invalid. They produced documents that they claimed proved the gold had belonged to Dalton. Then it was David's turn. He methodically dismantled every one of Dalton's claims. He showed the judge Matthew's documentation from the Denver bank, complete with verified serial numbers on the gold that did not match the serial numbers Dalton claimed were stolen. He pointed out inconsistencies in Dalton's story and raised questions about why, if the gold had truly been stolen, Dalton had waited weeks to report it and had never actually filed a formal complaint with law enforcement. Then David changed tactics. "Your Honor," he said, "even if we put aside the question of the gold's origin, there is a larger issue at stake here. The practice of selling human beings to satisfy debt, which is what happened to Miss Thornton, is deeply problematic. It violates the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which abolished slavery and involuntary servitude." Dalton's lawyers objected strenuously, arguing that debt servitude was different from slavery and was a common practice in the territories. But Judge Morrison held up a hand. "I am familiar with the 13th Amendment," he said dryly. "Counselor Mitchell, continue." "The amendment states that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime, shall exist in the United States. Miss Thornton committed no crime. She incurred no debt of her own. Yet she was sold like property to satisfy her uncle's debts. That is the very definition of involuntary servitude. The practice should be banned, Your Honor, and this court has the power to make that statement." Judge Morrison leaned back in his chair, clearly thinking hard. The courtroom was utterly silent. Victoria held her breath, Matthew's hand tight around hers. Finally, the judge spoke. "I find in favor of the defendants. The documentation provided by Mr. Travis proves beyond doubt that the gold used at the auction was obtained legally. Therefore, the transaction stands and Mr. Dalton has no claim to Miss Thornton. Furthermore, I am issuing an injunction barring Mr. Dalton from harassing or approaching Miss Thornton or Mr. Travis in any way. As for the larger question raised by Counselor Mitchell, I agree that the practice of selling human beings to satisfy debt is deeply troubling and potentially unconstitutional. I am sending a formal recommendation to the territorial legislature that such practices be banned outright." The gavel came down, and it was over. They had won. Victoria felt her legs go weak with relief. Matthew caught her, holding her up, and David was grinning like he had won the lottery. Even Judge Morrison gave them a small smile before moving on to the next case. Outside the courthouse, Victoria threw her arms around Matthew and kissed him, not caring who saw. "It is over," she said. "We are free, really, truly free." "Not quite yet," Matthew said, but he was smiling. "There is one more thing we need to do, David." David looked up from the papers he was organizing. "Yes. How soon can you arrange a wedding?" David's grin got wider. "Give me an hour. Judge Morrison owes me a favor and he is in town through tonight. I am sure he would be happy to perform a ceremony." "An hour," Victoria said, laughing. "Matthew, I am wearing my only nice dress and I have not even thought about what to say in my vows." "Say you love me and you will spend your life with me," Matthew said. "That is all I need to hear." "Then yes," Victoria said. "Yes, let us do it. Let us get married right now, today, before anything else can happen to stop us." David rushed off to make arrangements. Matthew and Victoria walked slowly through Dodge City, hand in hand, marveling at how much their lives had changed in just a few short weeks. "Are you sure about this?" Victoria asked. "Getting married so quickly? We have only known each other a little over a month." "I have never been more sure of anything," Matthew said. "I knew you were special from the moment I saw you, and every day since has only confirmed it. You are strong and smart and brave and kind. You challenge me to be better. You make me laugh. You make me want to build a future worth living. Why would I wait to make that official, when you put it that way?" Victoria said, smiling. "I cannot think of a single reason to wait either." They were married that evening in David's office, with David and Mrs. Henderson as witnesses and Judge Morrison performing the ceremony. Victoria wore her blue dress and wildflowers in her hair that Matthew had picked for her. Matthew wore his best shirt and looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The ceremony was simple and short, just the essential words and the exchange of vows. When Judge Morrison pronounced them husband and wife, Matthew kissed Victoria with a tenderness that made her heart ache. Afterwards, David insisted on taking them to dinner at the best restaurant in Dodge City. They celebrated into the night, and Victoria felt happier than she had ever imagined possible. She was married to the man she loved, the man who had given her back her freedom and her future. They had won their case and could now live openly without fear of Dalton or his claims. It was perfect. The next morning, they began the journey back to Matthew's ranch. They traveled slowly this time, not fleeing but simply going home. The weather was beautiful, the fall colors just beginning to show on the trees along the rivers and creeks. They stopped early each evening and made love under the stars, delighting in each other and in their newfound security. When they finally crested the last hill and saw Matthew's ranch spread out before them, Victoria held her breath. Would it still be standing? Would Dalton's men have destroyed it in their absence? But the buildings were intact. The cabin, the barn, the corrals, all just as they had left them. As they rode into the yard, the handful of horses Matthew had left behind whinnied a greeting. "It is all here," Matthew said, wonder in his voice. "I was so afraid it would be burned to the ground." "Maybe Dalton heard about the court case and called his men off," Victoria suggested. "Or maybe they just did not see the point in destroying an empty ranch. They spent the next few days settling back in and making repairs." Matthew checked all the fences and buildings, fixing the minor damage from wind and weather. Victoria planted some herbs in the garden and organized the cabin to better suit 2 people instead of 1. It felt like building a home, not just maintaining a property. One evening, about a week after their return, they sat on the porch watching the sunset, just like they had done so many times before. But now Victoria was Mrs. Travis, wearing her wedding ring alongside her engagement ring, and the future stretched before them bright and full of promise. "What do you want our life to look like?" Matthew asked, his arm around her shoulders. "I mean long term. 5 years from now, 10 years from now. What do you dream about?" Victoria considered this. "I dream about building this ranch into something really special. Not huge necessarily, but successful and sustainable. I dream about maybe starting a school someday for the children who live out here on the isolated farms and ranches, so they do not grow up without education the way so many do. And I dream about a family, children of our own. Not right away necessarily, but eventually. What about you?" "Sounds like we dream about the same things," Matthew said with a smile. "Though I will confess I know nothing about running a school." "Good thing you married a woman whose mother was a teacher," Victoria said. "I think I can handle that part." Matthew pulled her close and kissed her temple. "Have I mentioned recently that I love you?" "Not in the last hour or so. You are slacking." "I love you, Victoria Travis, more than I knew it was possible to love another person. You are my heart and my home and my future. Every day with you is a gift." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes, happy tears. "I love you too. So much it scares me sometimes. I keep thinking something will happen to take this away, that I will wake up and it will all be a dream." "Not a dream," Matthew promised. "This is real. We are real. And I am going to spend the rest of my life proving it to you every single day." The years that followed were not always easy, but they were good. Matthew and Victoria built their ranch slowly and carefully, expanding their herd and improving their property. Victoria did indeed start a small school, teaching the handful of children from neighboring ranches to read and write and cipher. She loved it, loved passing on knowledge the way her mother had done. 3 years after their marriage, Victoria gave birth to their first child, a boy they named William after Matthew's father. 2 years after that came a daughter, Eleanor, named for the girl whose death had set Matthew on the path that led him to Victoria. And 2 years after that, another daughter, Sarah, named for Victoria's mother. The children grew up strong and healthy, surrounded by love and the wide Kansas sky. William became a rancher like his father, with the same quiet strength and unwavering integrity. Eleanor became a teacher like her mother and namesake, fighting for education rights for women. Sarah became a lawyer, inspired by Uncle David's stories of fighting for justice. Matthew's ranch grew into one of the most respected operations in the region, known for quality cattle and honest dealing. Victoria's school became a fixture in the community, and several of her students went on to achieve great things. But through it all, through the hard winters and the prairie fires and the economic panics, through the births and the losses and the triumphs and the failures, Matthew and Victoria remained each other's constant. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset and talking about their days. They still made each other laugh. They still looked at each other with wonder sometimes, marveling at how a moment of crisis had brought them together and forged something so strong. On their 30th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, Victoria looked across the table at her husband. His dark hair was now streaked with silver, and lines of age marked his face. But his blue eyes were as clear and kind as they had been the day he had sat on his horse at the edge of a crowd and changed her life forever. "What are you thinking about?" Matthew asked, noticing her gaze. "I am thinking about choices," Victoria said. "About how you told me I could choose my future, and how that simple statement changed everything. You gave me back my power to choose, and I chose you. Every day since, I have chosen you, and I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." Matthew reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb rubbing over the wedding ring she had worn for 30 years. "I chose you too," he said. "That day in Salina I chose to fight for you, and every day since, I have chosen to love you, to honor you, to build a life with you. Best choice I ever made." Their oldest son, William, raised his glass. "To choices," he said, "and to the courage to make them." "To choices," everyone echoed, glasses clinking. Victoria looked around the table at the family she and Matthew had built, at the life they had created from a moment of crisis and a leap of faith. She thought about that frightened girl standing on an auction platform, reduced to property, stripped of dignity and agency. She thought about the man who had ridden in and given her back her power to choose. She thought about how one act of courage, one decision to do the right thing regardless of cost, could ripple outward and create something beautiful. And she smiled, because she knew that the story she had lived was not just her own. It was a story about the power of choice, the strength of love, and the courage it takes to fight for justice even when the whole world seems against you. It was a story worth living, worth telling, worth remembering. As the evening drew to a close and their family headed to their various homes, Matthew and Victoria walked out to their porch one more time, just the two of them and 30 years of memories. The sun was setting over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. "You know what I think?" Matthew said, his arm around Victoria's shoulders in the familiar, comfortable way of long married couples. "What do you think?" "I think we did all right," Matthew said. "We took a terrible situation and turned it into something good. We built a life worth living. We raised good children who are making the world better. We loved each other well. That is more than most people get." "We did better than all right," Victoria corrected. "We did wonderfully." And it all started because a cowboy outbid everyone at an auction and told a frightened girl that she could choose her future. That was the moment everything changed. "Best $5,000 I ever spent," Matthew said with a grin. Victoria laughed and leaned into him. "Best choice I ever made," she said. "Choosing you, choosing us, choosing this life." They stood together as the sun sank below the horizon, two people who had found each other in the worst of circumstances and built the best of lives. Their story was not a fairy tale with magic and miracles. It was better than that. It was real. It was earned. It was theirs. And as the stars began to emerge overhead, the same stars that had watched over them on that first night they spent together fleeing across the prairie, Victoria felt a deep sense of peace and gratitude. The journey had been hard, but the destination had been worth every step. The challenges had been real, but the love had been stronger. The world had tried to break them, but they had chosen to be unbreakable together. That was the power of choice. That was the strength of love. And that was the legacy they would leave behind. Proof that even in the darkest moments, even when all seems lost, courage and compassion can change everything. The end.